Hello, I'm Alex Green, the Service Owner for Digital Preservation at the National Archives and the lead for this project. Thank you for joining us to hear about DiAGRAM, the Digital Archiving Graphical Risk Assessment Model. One of the biggest challenges in preserving digital records is understanding and balancing the various risks to the collection. These can range from obsolete software to physical disasters such as floods, and every archive is unique in its situation, priorities and resources. Up until now, these risks have had to be estimated quite crudely and in isolation, with no way of finding evidence that one approach will be more effective in preserving the records than another. Over the last year, we have been creating a model using a statistical risk management approach, which involved creating a Bayesian network with conditional probabilities. This allows us to think about risks and how they are connected and influence one another. Using this model, we have built an online tool that provides archivists with evidence to help them decide which interventions will ensure that their digital records can be most effectively preserved. This tool is DiAGRAM, and I will give you a short overview of the project and the tool. Hannah will describe how the model was created, and David will give a brief demonstration of the current version. Please note that DiAGRAM's appearance and user interface are currently under development and will change. We are planning an online launch of the final version in early November. First of all, I'd like to give some more context as to why there is a need for the tool we've created. So, as I said, there is a variety of threats to the digital records held in archives. First of all, technology is evolving rapidly. We all know that technology doesn't stay still. How do we preserve email discussions with multiple threads, multiple attachments, and an assortment of image footers? And what about machine learning algorithms, such as those used in government to make decisions, and entire databases with their associated documentation? As a profession, we are constantly having to make decisions about preserving new formats and technologies that didn't exist until recently. A further threat is that some of the existing standards are outdated. There is a focus in some standards on the technical challenge of building a digital repository, which takes a great deal of money and time, but relying on standards that require a technical solution can be potentially harmful, as we miss opportunities to mitigate other, perhaps more pressing risks. We want to equip ourselves with tools that target our investment to drive better, evidence-based outcomes for archives. And thirdly, there is a skills gap across the archive sector. Archives are moving from an era of relative stability in archival practice to one of continual change. Each new generation of digital technology gives rise to a new set of risks with which archives must keep pace. The Archive Sector Workforce Development Strategy was published in October 2018, and it identified the need for an increase in digital skills. A subsequent survey of UK archives last year provided further evidence on the current skills shortage. There is also a widening gap between the resources we have and the resources we need, and the techniques that would help close this gap, good risk management supported by sound evidence and robust statistics, are currently beyond the reach of the archive sector. These threats are what the project and the tool will help address by improving archivists' understanding of risks to digital records, enabling them to compare and prioritise the threats, and allowing them to quantify them in order to develop strategies and to help support business cases. So how does DiAGRAM work? DiAGRAM is a web-based interactive tool that provides archivists with a score for the risk to their collections. This score is based on the two most important factors in preserving digital records: how much intellectual control of the records the archive has, meaning how much technical, descriptive, access and contextual metadata it has about the records, and renderability, whether the archive can provide a useful representation of the original record. To use the tool, the archivist answers 9 questions about the archive's policies and its holdings, and the model uses conditional probability to calculate the initial risk score. The archivist can then change her answers to some of those questions and compare the new score against her original score to see if the risk has increased or decreased. She can then use this knowledge to focus her resources on what will have the biggest impact on the record's preservation. She could also use this score as evidence to support a business case for increased funding. For example, an archive may store all their records on USB hard drives, but if instead they stored them in the cloud, how much of an impact would that have on the successful preservation of the records? DiAGRAM will show her by reflecting this change in the risk score, which could be used to support a case for a change of policy on digital storage. Hannah will now describe how the model was built.
Okay, thank you. So as alluded, my name is Hannah Merwood and I'm a research assistant in digital preservation at the National Archives working on our Bayesian network for risk. So what is a Bayesian network? A Bayesian network is a type of probabilistic graphical model. Bayesian networks capture conditional dependencies through directed arcs and use Bayesian inference to compute probabilities and update the model after new evidence is observed. This is a very technical definition, so I'd like to give you an example of a Bayesian network instead. So, there is a risk that I am late for work. But if you ask me to quantify this risk, that might be difficult for me to estimate on the spot. Naturally, I might, in my head, break this down some more to explore why I might be late and the associated probabilities of each of these dependent events. So, there's a risk that I'm late for work, which I'm going to represent as a node or variable in the network that's going to be drawn on the right-hand side. When this happens, it is normally because my train is delayed. So, therefore, I'm going to add another node to my network about whether or not the train was late, and this will have a directed arc going from that variable, the train being late, to being late for work, because whether or not I'm late for work depends on whether or not my train was late. But I often sleep through my alarm too and end up leaving my house later. So again, we have another reason why I might be late for work. So another node in the network with a directed arc or an arrow going through that node to late for work. Now this is my network, and that is the structure formed, which is the first part that you need. The next thing is the probabilities. So again, I'm going to think through this in the different what ifs. So if my train is late, there is a 50-50 chance that I'll be late for work. So I'm going to record that bit of information. And on average, my train is late once a week. So assuming we work a standard 5-day working week, that's 1 in 5 days, so that's 20% of the time that the train is late. I sleep through my alarm 5% of the time, and when this happens, there is no way I can get to work on time. So again, more information that 5% of the time I'll sleep through my alarm, and if this happens, I'm definitely late for work. There is one more scenario to consider here. So we've looked at whether or not I sleep through my alarm, whether or not the train was late. But what if neither happens? What if my train is on time and I do hear my alarm? In that situation, I'm going to say I'm definitely on time and there's a 0% chance that I'm late for work. So by breaking down the problem into thinking of all the conditional events and relationships, I can calculate that overall there is a 15% chance of being late. Further questions one could now ask is, if I am late, what is the probability it was because I slept through my alarm? And what if my train is late 40% of the time instead? And if so, would my manager believe me if I always blamed my lateness on the train? So this is a small example of a Bayesian network, which is formed of the structure and relationships, and then the data and probabilities. This is our Bayesian network of digital preservation risks. Each node here represents an underlying threat or important variable in calculating the overall risk. The precise definitions of each node are all contained within the application itself. As Alex mentioned, the ultimate aim is for renderability and full intellectual control, and all the other factors in the network affect these. Sometimes they affect only one, and sometimes they affect both. As an example, let's have a look at the node called obsolescence, highlighted now in yellow. The definition is as follows: essential equipment, hardware or software required to access the bit stream becoming out of date or unusable. For example, hardware no longer being produced or essential software to access the media no longer supported. This depends a lot on the storage medium used. For instance, D1, an early digital video format, is far more at risk of obsolescence than an LTO tape. But if you have good technical skills, you may still be able to recover the bit stream. This is why storage medium and technical skills are the parent nodes and feed into obsolescence and your probability of that event. An object can only be bit preserved if you have access to the bit stream. Therefore, the probability of obsolescence feeds into the probability of bit preservation, which in turn feeds into the probability of the object being renderable. A large model like this can be treated as a collection of smaller subsystems to help break it down. This is what we did, and by talking to different experts about different sections, we could refine the model and identify the important variables and relationships for a diverse range of digital preservation risks. Now you've seen the structure, what about the probabilities? This is something we knew we had to consider from the start, especially as there is very limited data available on digital preservation risks. Where it does exist, it is often too specific as well. For example, the failure rate of different models of commercial NAND solid-state drives is not something that would be useful for our more holistic border model. Fortunately, Bayesian networks are often created to assess the risk of events where there is no historical data, and this can be addressed by applying a statistical technique called expert elicitation. Expert elicitation harnesses the knowledge and experience of professionals in the field and is as good as you can get without having hard data. We followed a formal protocol with a trained facilitator to elicit the 24 conditional probabilities we needed to populate the model. We followed the IDEA protocol, an acronym which stands for Investigate, Discuss, Estimate and Aggregate, which is designed to reduce bias, anchoring and groupthink. For our 2-day virtual workshop held in April, we had 22 experts from 10 different UK organisations to ensure we had participants from a wide range of digital archiving and preservation backgrounds and experiences. The investigate part of the elicitation is about getting a common understanding of the questions, how they should be answered. All experts then gave a first initial round of their answers to the questions in private without conferring and without looking up for answers anywhere else. Day 2 then began with a discussion phase, where we had a discussion on each question based on a visualisation of anonymised responses. There was then an open discussion on why some people may have answered high and some people may have answered low. And the aim of the discussion phase was not to achieve a consensus, just an open discussion of ideas and sharing knowledge so that we all had the same interpretation and understanding again. Next, the experts went and did their final estimate, where they answered the same questions that they had from the first round. Here they could choose to keep their answers the same, or they may wish to revise them based on the discussion. And then finally, aggregate. The statisticians at the University of Warwick combined all the individual results to create a final estimate that we needed for our model. These estimates were created by averaging all the results, but weighting them by the performance of individuals on calibration questions. Calibration questions are used to determine individual accuracy and informativeness. And for our workshop, we embedded 20 calibration questions amongst the answers we needed answers to, so experts answered them all in the same way, because for the calibration questions, we already had the answers that we could measure the performance of the experts against. So, what other data sources were in the model? As discussed, the main one was expert elicitation, but we also used data from a digital skills survey held in the UK in 2019, data from our own collections on file formats, and then data from open data from cloud data storage providers on their access and durability, and from our UK government website on the long-term flood risk of United Kingdom postcodes. Some nodes are also deterministic, where we have defined risks in such a way that their states can be certain. For example, if you do not have sufficient content metadata, you cannot identify the material. And if you cannot identify the material, you certainly don't have intellectual control. In the model itself, we also have 9 input questions where every time we ask the user to update with their own experiences for their own archive, which the model then uses to generate the risk score. So, how do we measure the risk? The risk score in the model will be based on scores for renderability and scores for intellectual control. Currently, these scores relate directly to the probability of having renderability and the probability of having full intellectual control, but we are reviewing this and we're open to suggestions on what might be the most intuitive way to score the risk models. The most important thing to remember is that a higher score means a lower risk, and that is what you should remember for the demo today. Each of these scores for renderability and intellectual control are currently given out of 50, so the overall risk score will be a number between 0 and 100. Most often in the tool, you'll be reading off the scores from a column chart. As an example, here the total height represents the overall risk score. You can also look at the scores for renderability and intellectual control separately. Note also that due to rounding, these 2 separate scores may not always add up to the total overall score. In this particular example, the overall risk score is 29, with renderability having a score of 12 and intellectual control a score of 17. Another thing you may notice is 2 dashed lines on the plot. These represent the maximum and minimum score attainable without manually changing the conditional probabilities in the underlying data. These are the conditional probabilities that we have derived from our data sources and the expert elicitation. For most purposes, including what we'll be talking about today, you should consider a score of 71, where the upper dashed line is, as good as you can get, and a score of 5, where the lower line is, as low as you can get. But we are hoping to provide further guidance in the future of what an acceptable score would be, rather than just the best and worst possible. So this is something we're looking at and is very likely to change in the near future with our UI developer in at the moment. The tool is designed to enable users to compare different digital preservation policies or scenarios and how this affects the overall risk. Graphs like this are used throughout the tool to help visualize and compare different scores. In this example, policy 1 might be put more focus on improving metadata documentation, and policy 2 might be increase the rendering tools available at the archive. You can see that overall policy 2 is a taller column, so is better. But if you're particularly only interested in improving your intellectual control, you might prefer policy 1, because this has the score of 20 for intellectual control, whereas policy 2 has a score for 15. Also note that the model will automatically sort the policies in order left to right, with the best one always being on the far left. So that is a brief overview of the methodologies and how to interpret the results. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague David Underdown, who will give you a live demonstration of the DiAGRAM tool in action.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. Apologies for the technical gremlins that seem to have been striking today. I'm going to share my screen. I haven't actually got the tool open. That's the problem. So to introduce myself, as Alex mentioned in passing, I'm one of the senior digital archivists at the National Archives. I did originally do a maths degree, and then I worked as an IT developer for several years, joined the National Archives as a database administrator, and I've gradually moved over to doing actual operational digital preservation work. So now I'm one of the digital archivists. This has given me a chance to kind of go back to my roots to some extent in helping with the mathematical side behind this. So it's been quite interesting to go back. Hopefully now you can see my screen. So a quick overview. As has been mentioned, we are doing some more work on this at the moment. So what you see here today, and I'll just pop the URL in chat as well, because you can all have a play with this yourselves later on. So that's in the chat now. The home screen has a brief introduction, also links to some of the previous talks and things we've done, recordings of those and the slides from those to help you. I believe that there will be a recording this available and the slides as well. So again, those will be there. The next tab that's available is a way of looking at the network that Hannah has just explained, and getting a view of the definition of each node. You have to use the drop down at the moment to select those, and they will come out in alphabetical order. But you can switch those and find the definition of obsolescence that Hannah was talking about, and so on, and look at each of those as you like. And it states the data source, when we got that data, what the associated node states are. So some of them obviously have, this one just has 2, but others, such as the type of digital object, have 3. 3 is the most, I think. So once you've played around with that, looked at that, you can always kind of come back to that and review those. If you've got questions while you're going through, the next thing to do is create the sort of baseline model for your own archive. So this customizes some of the inputs to make it a better fit to your own particular circumstances. Obviously, archives do vary quite a lot in their content, what they're collecting, the balance between born digital and surrogates and so on. So we have been looking at modeling our own archive. So taking this first question, we're pretty lucky with our technical skills. You know, we've got a team of over 30 in the digital archiving department now, including experienced digital archivists with good skills of their own. Most of us can program or script a bit in Python to help us solve issues and improve metadata. We have a full development team who work on customizing our installation of Preservica and various other projects. And we've got people experienced in doing file format research and so on. So we're pretty comfortable with our technical skills that we can solve most issues that we come across. So for our own archive, we would put that at 100%. In the current form, it's got a few questions to kind of help you, guide you in your thinking about how to score, making this a bit more robust and making it easier to be consistent across different archives is something we're working on in some of the current ongoing development work of the user interface. So this will probably have a series of radio buttons or similar, and be using things like the NDSA levels, the DPC's rapid assessment model, or for the technical skills, selecting some relevant things from the DigCurve framework, so that you can easily see whether your skills kind of match up with how we were thinking about this. So having completed that, we move on to the next question, which is about system security. So again, we're pretty confident in our ability. There's probably always some things that can be tightened up, so we're not going to go right up to 100% on this one. We'll set it to 95. I mean, our digital archive is highly separated from the rest of our systems at the National Archives. We've had a specific penetration test and all these things to really help us be sure of our system security. But there are always some things that could be improved, or apply patches more quickly or whatever. So we won't go right up on that one. Checksums. This is about file hashes for fixity over time. So the three options here, which might seem slightly unintuitive. So yes means the files actually came to us with a checksum that had been created in the original system or by the originator of the materials. So not only do we know that they're unchanged over time, we know that there was no glitches whilst they were actually being then transferred to us. So what we received was definitely what the depositor intended to give us. So even while we were doing some initial checking, nothing else can have happened to it, and then it's fully ingested into our system. We can carry on checking. And then the next option is self-generated. So here we generate a checksum only on our own system. So the files are first transferred to us, and then we do the checksum. So there is some chance that something could have gone slightly awry in that transfer, and we haven't actually got what we thought we had. But from the point we received it, we can then be sure. And then finally, no. This means either we don't have anything at all, or perhaps it was actually only generated following ingest into the full digital preservation system. Again, we can at that point be sure, that it's unchanged, but there's potentially quite a long period between it being handed over from the depositor and then getting into that full system where actually anything could have happened to it. So we regard that as being somewhat less reliable. In our case, when the government departments send things to us now, they always have to include the checksum. So our overall collection, 99%, we're saying yes, and then in times gone by, we weren't so rigorous in doing that. So we know there's currently around a small amount, probably actually less than 1%, but we're modelling it at 1%, where it was only generated on ingest into our systems. And then this is about the kind of ongoing information management, so tracking preservation actions, any other changes we make to records as we go on. So we're not bad. Again, there have been over time some different systems. There's still some bits of manual management, particularly if things need a little bit of tidying up when they first arrive, if departments haven't quite got metadata into the right shape, and we've had to do a little bit of rework, things like that. Although we do track that and save copies, it's not completely integrated into our digital preservation system, so we could improve that over time. Now, digital object, again, there are three options: born digital and surrogate. Probably speak for themselves. So surrogate is scanned material that was originally analog, paper, maybe video that came off VHS cassettes, anything like that, and where, particularly in our case, it's those original materials are still regarded as the actual legal record. And then that's where this digitized category comes in, where maybe something started in an analog form, but in order to be transferred to us, it was actually digitized, and we've only received it in that digital form. And so it's treated as a digital record from that point on, but it's not originally born digital. And the main difference here is in the underlying probabilities. So where we're digitizing both digitized and surrogates, we expect that there will be a much more restricted range of formats involved, and in our case, certainly for the digitized material, we have additional requirements around metadata to record those digitization processes, because we know one of the things with our readers, our users, is that sometimes with surrogates they do want to see the original, check that things were a good copy, nothing was missed out, and so on. And for those digitized records, that option isn't available, so we capture additional information to say, actually, there was a corner missing off that document when it was digitized, so it's not that data was lost in the digitization, it was as good a copy as we could get. If there was already a hole punched through something and some words missing, I'm sorry, that was how it was handed to us and brought into the process. Born Digital, obviously, certainly in the UK, we have no real restrictions on formats that departments can transfer to us. I know that does vary. Different places have different policies, so we expect there's quite a lot more variation potentially in the types of file formats that might arrive in Born Digital. So our current balance, and this is about numbers of files currently, so where we've digitized things, there can actually be quite a lot of image files related to that. So we've only got about 19% Born Digital and 81% digitized. And so then we move on to the storage medium. So this is about materials. Category A is kind of fairly unstable media. So this could be, as the examples here, USB flash drives, floppy disks rather, SD cards, CDR disks. B is the more stable, so proper enterprise storage, LTO tapes, commercially pressed CD-ROMs and Blu-ray discs, where they're not the rewritable ones where it's actually just a die that's being changed. It's actually burnt into the underlying structure. And then C is essentially cloud storage. It's the ongoing refreshment of the medium and maintenance is being dealt with by some external company. So we have everything on a type B on LTO tape. And then replication and refreshments. This is about making sure you've always got at least 2 copies of everything, and an ongoing policy to make sure that if one of those fails in some way, or a file fails fixity check, then you kind of immediately take a new copy so that you maintain having that at least 2 good copies. So again, our system ensures that, so that's 100% for us. And then our operating environment. This is making sure so that second copy then is being held off-site. We're particularly thinking, as we'll see in a moment, the main physical risk we've considered in the model so far is flooding. Obviously, there are others, but to complete the work in the time we had and have something that was useful and usable without getting too much into the weeds on those things, we've stuck with flooding for now. You probably could reuse that same node to consider some other options, maybe fire or whatever, but it would need a little bit more thought around the underlying probabilities. So this asks about having that offsite or really good mitigations within the building, protecting materials. So it says answer 0 only if everything's in the same place and you're not covered with mitigations in your building and so on against flood. So we are, so that gets to 100%. And then this physical disaster, as I say, is about flood really at the moment. And we are a UK-based project, so we direct people to the UK government's flood risk checker. So if you can then enter a postcode, obviously in different places you would have to find some other way of finding a risk, and we can then get information about that. It's described as very low risk. There is a map. People who know the National Archives will know we are quite close to the Thames, but because this includes the flood defences that are in place, then it marks us as low risk. And again, we have got various mitigations within the building itself, protecting us further against flood and we have a full offsite copy. So we take that very low risk, and that's where it's set by default. So we don't actually need to move anything there. And then that's our basic model that we've created. And then that'll be shown against the default, which the default that's built in at the moment was a kind of estimation of an average UK archive based on what we saw in some of those data sources that we've mentioned. So as perhaps you might expect and hope, we've got quite a lot higher than that average level. Once you've created a model, there's also an option here. You could come sort of straight through to this, and if you will see how you can download things later, you can then upload something you've created previously to save having to re-answer all the questions. This is an area we are working on as to how to actually sort of show, I'm not going to go into this very much, show which of the nodes have the most capacity to help you improve your risk. So here information management is listed at the top, so that would be the one that would most easily help you improve your score. But we know this needs some work, so I'm not going to go hugely into that now. So what you're more likely to do, having built your model, is then consider how things might change in the future, whether that's things you control, or perhaps we're looking at our funding over the next few years. So if we were to only kind of carry on receiving the same amount of cash funding that we currently are, then actually year on year that actually leads to a decrease because inflation and so on. So we might assume that over a few years, some of those things that we'd looked at before start to kind of decay, for want of a better word. So maybe over time, those will. Sorry, I should have selected multiple things. So perhaps our technical skills go down to 81% rather than the 87% rather than the 100% we'd originally thought about. On the other hand, because our checksums, because we're not getting any more where we didn't have it, then effectively that proportion that was in there originally becomes so tiny. Sorry, I didn't actually click that one. I think it becomes so tiny that it becomes infinitesimal. It just isn't worth worrying about. While our information management, similarly, sorry, this is one of the other slight quirks. Let me select all the ones I want to change, and then I will go through them properly. This is one of the bits we are working on. Those are all the ones that change. So over time, that will effectively become 100% because everything else is so tiny. Our digital objects, for now, we'll assume they stay in the same ratio. We will remodel that probably as well and see what happened if we get a huge increase in other things. So now with information management, again, with the decreased funding, we might see a decrease, but on the other hand, we know we're also working on a big project to make it easier for people to transfer stuff to us. So we think probably those would cancel out. So we're going to leave that at 85%. And our replication and refreshment. We know our tape library is starting to get a bit older. So again, in a few years' time, that will be even worse. So there's a potential that maybe we wouldn't actually be able to create some of those extra copies. So to model what happens, we'll do that as 98%, but everything is still staying on that good media. I think that's what we were modelling. Oh, no, actually, we could say there's a little bit more risk of some of it becoming obsolete as well, perhaps. So that's, and our technical skills, we're going to go down to 87%. So that's our so we see there's some decrease there, and that's, you know, because we're losing capacity because our funding is effectively decreasing. So now, if you click the reset model, then that means we go back to working on that original policy rather than looking at things related to the new policy. So if instead we were actually able to work on that information management and push that up, we see that makes quite a bit difference if we could keep everything else the same, if our funding kept pace with inflation and everything, and perhaps sufficient more to actually allow us to really dig into improving the information management aspects. We see an improvement there. So those are the sorts of things you could do. We could also have tried to put that improvement on information management then on kind of on top of that. So if other things are equal, or if we manage to get a particular budget for replacing our storage, then things would change again. So once you've kind of gone through the policies, scenarios you might want to develop and think about the funding for that, we can then do a little bit of reporting. This is something we're also working on at the moment, improving the options here. At the moment, it gives you a bit more information, the full unrounded or less rounded versions of the scores, and then there are options to save the plot. That saves the image. You could then use in a report. You can save the model in currently just a .bif files. That's a Bayesian interchange format. So that's only something that's really relevant within the kind of R language that we're using here. And then you just click the download and it will give you actually a zip file with those separate plots in. There's a bit more you can do if you're really confident. You can play with the underlying probabilities that we worked out. And sorry, storage life, I think was what I wanted. Conditional probability table. So you could actually, if we know that our storage, for example, is particularly good, we could change some of the underlying. Maybe it was storage medium that I was thinking of. Sorry, we could change some of the underlying obsolescence, the underlying probabilities that we'd elicited and directly change these, which would also have an impact on the model. But we're not generally expecting people to do that. It would normally be this scenario modeling type compare policies where you'd do it. We also, to make things perhaps a little more familiar, you can kind of choose a subset by using the OAS functional entities, which kind of just chooses a relevant subset of forms, except there's a slight bit where you have to manually do that. So then you can just see which ones relate to those functional areas, entities. I'm not sure in the end quite how useful that was, so it may not survive the current GUI development work, but that's there at the moment. Okay, so that's a bit of an intro. Hopefully that's shown some of the ways it could be used. Obviously, when you're trying to improve, you can then associate your own costs with that and show that to stakeholders. So from there, I will open it to questions.
Thanks very much, David. So as David said, we're happy to take any questions. If there are any, if you want to type them or just say them.
I can tell you that we have been, we've had some really good news. Yesterday was a really good Monday for us in that we found out we've been nominated as a finalist for the Digital Preservation Awards that DPC do biannually under the Research and Innovation Award, which is very exciting for us. And we also have our article accepted by the ARA Journal, which is the journal for the Archivists and Records Association in the UK as well. So we are getting a lot of coverage and getting the word out about the tool, which is really great for us. I should say actually that this is a UK tool at the moment. It's kind of based on UK data, things like the flood risk. It's obviously a UK centric risk, but we are hoping from feedback that we've had from workshops we've done online with DPC that it could be used by other archives internationally. And in an ideal world, you'll be able to pop your own data into it and to be able to adjust it so you get even more precise results around what your risks are. So I'm happy to hear any thoughts as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question.
Stunned everyone into silence.
Yeah, and sorry about the poor sound at the beginning. Apparently, I wasn't aware. That's why I'm holding the mic up here, just so that I make sure I'm heard. Okay, well, I mean, feel free to email us any questions you have. If you think of anything later, the link is in the chat, so you can go and play with it yourself. That's our dev version. That's currently under development, so you won't see any of the changes that we're making to the UI at the moment. It could look quite drastically different. We're weighing up our options at the moment in what we've got the money for and the time to do in the remainder of the time on the project. But if there isn't any other questions, we can leave it there. Is that okay, Kristin? Aha.
Yes, I mean, I can't really see any questions in the question and answer box, and neither in the chat box.
Oh, there's a question coming from Katie. Okay. Right, we shall wait with bated breath, Katie.
Oh, Katie is just saying that we should give some time.
Yeah, that's true. It does take a while to type things, doesn't it? Particularly with, this isn't an easy tool. This is one of the struggles we're finding is how to make it intuitive to use when in fact it does some quite complex things. But we still want to make it as intuitive to use as we possibly can. So, Kathy's question. We do have a policy of archival formats.
So okay. I think this is that they do have this more restricted range of formats. So I guess there are two ways you could approach that. You could either actually say, in effect, we'll treat them as digitized because that's more similar in a way that there's quite a narrow range of things, or you would have to go in and change those conditional probabilities and make them more similar to the other categories where we're assuming there is a more a narrower range. Things are more homogeneous in terms of the material that's being received. So there are a couple of approaches, and you would expect that to see mostly on the renderability side. You would see the improvement because obviously it just means you understand those formats better. It's easier to make sure that you'll be able to carry on using those in the future. Cloud storage probabilities is an interesting one as well. Yes, I mean, we are having to take things a little at face value, and that is an area that probably needs a bit more improvement to the storage area to really get that done. Some people are quite open with what they're doing. We quite like looking at Backblaze's results. They're very open about all the failure rates for all their drives what that means. And they make the point that actually when you get to a certain level of reliability for the underlying storage, then it's actually things like your current credit card expires, they send you a billing email that goes into spam, and as a result, you don't pay the bill, and so they just cut you off and delete all your material. At a certain level of reliability, then that actually becomes a greater risk than the storage failing. So yeah, these are all things we need to keep revising and revisiting the model, checking it against data in real life as things go along. I mean, hopefully one thing here is that now we've got the model, it actually kind of points to areas where as a community then we should be trying to gather more data, so then we can actually feed real data into the model rather than what we've elicited from expert opinion so far. So this should be a kind of living thing as time goes on, that we can keep up to date with better, proper data, learn from real experience.
We'll see with the question about planning to add some guidance on how to answer questions. Yeah, that is one of the things that we're really thinking about hard at the moment, because we want it to be intuitive. We want people to not feel that it's really complex and they can't use it, but we also want people to get the most out of it. So I think we've come to the conclusion that we will have to have some kind of guidance. We're wondering how to build that into the tool, so you don't have to keep kind of moving from one page to another and jumping about. And we're also thinking about different user journeys. So we, for the first time, used it to do our own spending review. Hannah did a lot of the work for this and found out lots of things that she would like to do, which she couldn't do in the model with the way it works at the moment. So she would probably be considered an advanced user. But this is exactly the kind of purpose that we want the model to be used for. So we know that we need to be able to provide guidance. So yes, the short answer is yes, we will definitely be giving examples, giving ideas of how to answer and what sort of thing you would need in advance before you sit down to actually answer the questions and build them out.
Yeah, so what I was sort of doing there, showing a bit about how we're modelling our own archive, there's more to it than what I showed there. We will be looking to make some of that available as a bit of a case study of how we've used it ourselves, and trying to make cases for funding and things like that. And as I mentioned it in passing, we're looking at restructuring some of those bits. So it might ask you, if you've already assessed your archive against the NDSA levels, or using the Digital Preservation Coalition rapid assessment model, if you're at these levels, then that will kind of equate to a particular score. So we don't have to build so much guidance into this. We can rebuild and reuse, build on things that people elsewhere in the community have already established and have already got a level of acceptance.
I can see a comment about it'd be nice if all the sliders will automatically sum to 100. That's exactly what our developers been working on this morning. Very good point. And that is something we're trying to address. But also I would mention about guidance. We're improving, we're hoping to improve it. We're working on it at the moment, but better than anything else, if you out there have feedback, particularly when we finish this latest development sprint, and when we launch kind of our version 1, any feedback about, I found this difficult to answer, or you could use this instead, please do let us know. We want to make sure this is useful for everyone and kind of get as many ideas and feedback as possible. So please do give us feedback on the tool and how you find it.
Definitely. Can't see any more questions yet.
One's just come in the Q&A.
How do you position DiAGRAM compared to other self-assessment tools? Go on then, David.
So, well, as I've said, some of those other self-assessment tools can be useful to kind of actually determine how to answer those kind of input questions, and that will probably be more so when we finish the current round of development. A lot of other things, there've been various other attempts to actually build risk models specifically, but they tend to be quite qualitative. They don't have the quantitative element that that was one of the key drivers to actually be able to put figures on things. So it's a lot of the others. There's the spot model, Drambora, various others. It's all kind of, is this a high, medium, or low risk? Is the impact high, medium, or low? And you kind of multiply those together in some way, add up lots of different ones. They all tend to assume that all those individual risks are independent of each other as well. So you don't have here, we can see that actually things build on each other, they're linked together. So if your risk gets to a certain level in one place, it will suddenly make things much worse somewhere else as well. That's probably the real weakness in most of the others, is that everything is assumed to be kind of independent of each other, whereas really there are always dependencies. If you've had a hard drive failure and someone is having to work to put in a replacement and they're under pressure, then they'll make another mistake and something else goes wrong and things snowball. So that's quite a weakness, and people like David Rosenthal have pointed this out in quite a lot of their writing, that it's a lot easier to model things using classical techniques. It's a lot easier to model things as being independent. But generally it's not true. So the Bayesian methods make it much easier for us to incorporate those realistic interactions between different types of risk.
Any other questions? If you do like it, by the way, please feel free to vote for us for the DP Awards. I should probably get the shameless plug in now, really, shouldn't I? Do we also plan on making an error analysis? What do you mean by an error analysis?
Yes, so I think we are looking into kind of what impacts have the most effects on the overall risk, and that is something we're also trying to build into the model so that actually users can see that themselves live. We've got some ideas of people being able to directly see, if I move this, it only increases by 1 point, but if I move this, it increases by 10 points. So we have a feel for that, and we definitely want to build that into the model.
Yeah, the developer we've got currently, fortunately, also has quite a strong Bayesian background, so he's starting to come up with some interesting ideas how we could do these. So yeah, understanding the sensitivity to individual things is quite important. So yeah, does it matter if we put in 10 or 11% for something? Does it suddenly make a huge step change? So far, it seems to be reacting fairly linearly to all the inputs, I think. So yeah, you will see a change, but not a huge kind of butterfly effect. We won't suddenly get the tornado breaking out in the middle just from changing one slider to by 1% one way or the other. So it's not huge. Doesn't seem to be hugely sensitive to a small change in particular inputs.
Yeah, let's see if something pops up. Not yet. Yes, we would like to. you want to? Yeah, go ahead, David. You have thoughts on this.
It's an online tool. It is available to everyone. As we say, at the moment, the one issue with that is the data we have is largely UK focused. So potentially some aspects might be less applicable, or particularly at other places where maybe flood is probably the biggest natural disaster risk in the UK. In other areas, there could be lots of other ones. We're seeing lots of things at the moment with wildfires on the west coast of the US and things like that, and in Australia. Earlier in the year, there probably does need to be additional modelling to capture those physical disaster risks more accurately. And things, but as I say, part of what we've done so far is we had to develop something that was of a size that was kind of tractable and would show this was a useful approach and could be developed in the time we had, but is still useful and provides something that is usable and should help to meet the objectives we set ourselves. And so it's more than a proof of concept, hopefully, but there's definitely scope for further development and going deeper with some of the modelling and so on.
Yeah, we're planning to see how it gets used. So if you do attempt to use it, then we would love to hear from your experiences and what you think could be improved, or what you would like to get out of it. Things that maybe if you thought you'd get something that you didn't. That would be really useful for us to know. Oh, thank you, Catty. Yeah, terrorist attacks, power cuts, those sort of COVID confinements. Yeah, we just went into lockdown just as we were starting to work on the model in earnest, and we, really kicked ourselves for not modelling a pandemic, because that's always on the list of risk registers, isn't it? I've definitely had that in my list before, but I guess we've got the data for that now, so we could add it. Yeah, we should have that. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, so far it is all written in English as well. The one language we might have to consider ourselves is Welsh, although admittedly that doesn't have a huge impact outside the UK either. But as a UK government body, we potentially have to think about putting it into Welsh. But as it's still a research project as well, so we haven't gone too far down that route yet. Again, it will depend a bit on uptake. But if people did want to do it, we could look at with clarifying some of the licensing and things at the moment, and the way, again, some of the work we're doing at the moment should make it easier to sort of load the questions and things. So that would potentially make it easier to do versions in different languages as well.
Yeah.
Gaelic, yes. Okay. Overall, we have a particular responsibility still as the archive of the Welsh government as well, which we don't have in Scotland. National Records of Scotland have a bit more responsibility there. So Gaelic we don't have quite so much to do with.
Yes, we can. We've posted that to everyone, Hannah, definitely. If you do have questions.
No, just, yeah.
To all panelists. Oh, yes, to all panelists. Okay. Yes, we can give you an email. I think that's probably a good idea. So if you do want to email us at all, you can email our general inbox for our department, which is digital.preservation@nationalarchives.gov.uk. You put that, yeah, thank you, David, in the chat, so you can see that too. Okay. Unless I can see any other questions popping up.
So thank you, David, Hannah, and Alex for your presentation. And thank you all for joining us today. And sorry for the technical issues we had at the beginning. We will see if we can fix the sound issues that we had at the beginning, and then we will upload the webinar to our website.
Did lots of tests beforehand and everything seemed to be fine.
Okay. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you all.